Chapter 26, Part 3, The Chicago School of Architecture and Photography. So let's start with architecture in Chicago. Just like what happened in London, happens in Chicago. We have a Great Fire. 1871 was the Chicago Great Fire. And so we have all of these buildings being built immediately afterward. And so this is allowing a new style to emerge. The other thing that we have is a financial collapse in 1873. It actually takes a while to start building these buildings until the 1880s. This is when we have the first skyscrapers erected in Chicago. Let's start here with Richardson's Marshall Field Wholesale Store. Henry Hobson Richardson was a Boston architect known for this almost Romanesque style, very massive, bold, very textured stonework, simplified. This is a 7-story building. It takes up the entire block there in Chicago. But we also have something else going on, is some innovations because of this massive fire. So thanks to this fire, we have had some new innovations, one of which is trying to fireproof these buildings. So iron in and of itself is not fire resistant, and they found this out the hard way during the Chicago fire. So they're trying to fireproof metal by enveloping the iron and steel with terracotta tiles and later coating it with concrete. Remember, the Romans actually perfected, if not invented, concrete. Portland cement was invented in England in 1825. The other thing we have is a curtain wall. So this is where the outer walls of the building are basically hanging from a lip of a horizontal beam. So we're not building up from the bottom up. We're hanging these walls, and that's allowing these to not be as structurally important, and so therefore the buildings won't collapse as easily. So this is something that they start doing in this time period. This also allows for a lot more glass in these outer walls. All right, let's talk about Louis Sullivan. This is the Wainwright Building in St. Louis. Louis Sullivan designed the first skyscraper, this building here. Unfortunately, it's been destroyed, so all we have are the images. You might actually think of him as Adler and Sullivan. He joined Denkmar Adler in 1883, and their firm became known as Adler and Sullivan. Adler was kind of the engineer and planner, while Sullivan was definitely the visionary and the one in charge of the design concept. So we have a grid structure of a steel skeleton. We have a curtain wall, again allowing larger windows. We have a 7-story colossal piers on the outer of this building. We can see right there. And then we have this top area with a lot more decoration. So we do have some decoration, not nearly as decorated as the Art Nouveau buildings. This is another one of the Louis Sullivan buildings, the Schlesinger and Meyer store. Started out as a 9-story section on the left, but became a 12-story today. We have thin vertical piers that reflect the skeleton behind. Again, more and more glass. If you notice that the walls are disappearing and glass is appearing. Again, thanks to the curtain wall technique. And this is a detail. So we do have some intricate details. We kind of think of skyscrapers as being just glass and brick or steel and not much else. But there is a lot of decoration here during this time period. All right, now let's switch gears and let's talk about Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the Robie House here in Chicago. Frank Lloyd Wright worked for Louis Sullivan from 1888 to 1893. Wright was really focused on domestic architecture and nature, very interested in integrating nature into the houses that he built. He was best known for what he termed prairie houses, and they tend to have a very strong horizontal lines, again, mimicking the prairie which they're settled in. So we've got long horizontal lines, just kind of like the Midwest, where we don't have lots of mountains or even hills. It's very flat, and that's what his houses are. So again, very much interested in bringing nature in. So we have lots of windows. We have lots of outdoor spaces. He designed the Roby House in 1908. He has a cantilevered roof. That's what this here is. This roof, part of the roof is coming out. It's not based on columns or anything over here. It's cantilevered out. He does like to cantilever a lot, as you will see in Falling Water, one of his most well-known pieces. But sometimes that has some issues, especially here in the Midwest. Flat roofs are not always the best, especially with snow and ice gathering on top. He liked to have interior spaces that flowed one into another, communal rooms. Like to not have very many doors, or they would be like pocket doors. This is very much influenced by Japanese design. And part of this can be linked back to the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. There was a Japanese temple there, and he was fascinated by the design. And he integrated a lot of these ideas and elements into his buildings. For this house, he actually had specially made bricks made. The face of the brick is 1.5 by 5 inches. Again, he wants to integrate the building into the landscape, so he doesn't want very tall buildings standing out. Also, you tend to not have a prominent front door in most of his houses. The front door tends to be kind of hidden. You have to almost know where it is, so you don't have that big kind of front entryway that we're kind of used to. He does like to have the fireplace as a central area in his houses. Here's an interior shot of the Roby house. Now again, he's designing all elements. So he's designing the stained glass, he's designed the couch, the side tables, all of this he's designed. And he oftentimes did that in his houses. He designed the furniture, as well as the lamps and the doorknobs, everything he's designing, so it all integrates together. Here's the plan of the house. So again, you kind of see how it all works. Garages tend to be very well hidden. Again, he likes to hide those types of things. So this is the living room of the Francis Little house in Minnesota. And you can see a lot of those same elements. Again, big open spaces. Again, he designed the lamps, he designed the furniture. Everything is integrated into the space. He also likes to use earth colors. So you see lots of greens and browns and tans. Of course, Falling Water is probably one of the more famous ones, and that also had a lot of issues, especially with the cantilevering out. They've done a lot of repair work, but when you have water going through a space, and that tends to erode, and so lots of issues they've had with that. And you can see again, even if we have kind of the maybe more 60s colors here, but there's still more nature-based colors, and again, the big windows. Of course, Oklahoma has their very own Frank Lloyd Wright building. That is the Price Tower in Bartlesville. It's Frank Lloyd Wright's only skyscraper. And it is a hotel, so you can stay the night there. But whenever you're staying the night, remember that was designed as an apartment building so that young families could live there. And then kind of imagine, because these tend to be very small spaces. If you're not able to stay the night, they do have an area that is a museum, and some of the rooms are open just to tour. All right, so let's go into photography. So we talked a lot about the innovations of photography last time. So we've had a lot more innovations happening. We have the invention of dry plates that work a lot faster. Handheld cameras and shutters were invented. And a little company in 1888 called the Eastman Dry Plate Company of Rochester, New York, introduced this new thing called the Kodak camera. It was loaded with a paper roll with 100 frames, and when you were done shooting pictures, you sent it back to the company to have your photographs printed. It was a single lens reflex camera, had a mirror so the photographer could see the images in the viewer. By 1890, there were 161 photographic societies worldwide and 60 photographic journals. Photography is sweeping the nation, sweeping the world. Peter Henry Emerson, he's a British medical doctor, and was very interested in photography. You can see here. We have Gertrude Casimir, who was one of the founders of Stiglitz's photo secession in 1902. So she left a bad marriage, enrolled in art classes at the Pratt Institute in 1889, and started supporting herself with her new photographic career. Her works tend to be these kind of painterly, dreamlike pieces, very much organized like a painting. Alfred Stieglitz is going to be a big influencer in the world of photography, and later on in the realm of modern art, thanks to his gallery. So this is Stieglitz's The City of Ambition. This is from 1910. This is of New York. And the interesting thing is Stieglitz actually hated the modern buildings, the big city. He really didn't like that. He actually loved the countryside. You can see that he's kind of allowing the weather, the meteorological effects to kind of take the main focus in this piece. Very soft focus. And it's even softened by the smoke emanating from many of the buildings. But we also have the light kind of glinting off the water there. He ultimately ends up creating Gallery 291, which is going to be very important. So we've got Jacob Riis, and again, he's another one that uses photography for good. This is 5 cents a spot, unauthorized lodgings in a Bayard Street tenement. He immigrated from Denmark in 1870, became a police reporter in some of the roughest neighborhoods in New York City. And he started bringing his camera with him to photograph what he was seeing in order to generate support for social reform. He realized that something had to change. In order to create these spontaneous images, he oftentimes used a flash, which at the time was a magnesium flash powder. That was the predecessor of the flash bulb, so that he's able to go inside these very darkened buildings and take these eloquent photos. So this is a sleeping den on Bayard Street. It is a 13-foot square room that 12 to 13 people lived in. So just let that sink in. It's a 13-foot square room where 13 people lived. So what they would do is they would take turns sleeping. As you can see, you can't fit 13 people in there, but there's a lot of people. So you have the stove here. It's for heat and for cooking. And then every square inch of space beyond that is for the men to sleep. He ends up publishing a book, How the Other Half Lives, in 1890. This book ends up getting enough attention that it results in the bulldozing of many of these shanty areas in Bayard Street. And then that area is actually ends up being transformed into a park. Here's another one of his photos showcasing these children who are trying to find a place to sleep there on the streets. And here's another one. Edward Maybridge. This is sequence photographs of the trot and gallop from Nature. Maybridge was hired by Leland Stanford, a business tycoon, politician, and founder of Stanford University, to use photography to resolve the question, do all four legs of a horse leave the ground when it is running? So he set up 12 cameras on a raceway, created calibrated backdrop, as you can see, and made a series of sequential photos. And the answer is yes, they do. So he actually did several of these studies in locomotion, published these in a book in 1887 called Animal Locomotion.